Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health invites you to listen to another great episode of the Health, Hope, and Happiness podcast brought to you by Stifel. On today's segment of Ask Dr. Steve Grape, owner of Mindurance, an organization for one-on-one mental health coaching to help coaches and athletes manage their stress and enhance their performance. Today, we're going to discuss a timely topic, youth sports burnout. And just as many adults experience burnout from their jobs, our youth are experiencing burnout from their job, which in this case is the sport they have chosen to participate in. So, as usual, we offer different perspectives on this topic from a coach's, parent, and athletic point of view. This is a timely topic. So I know when I was growing up, for instance, I played Y basketball during the winter and the season was over. As I got older as a teenager, the very best of the best played AAU ball. And perhaps, Steve, as you were growing up, youth travel leagues were starting to pop up and become more popular. And I know for my kids, they kind of experienced that 365-day sports cycle we're in today. So I know you're doing a little bit of traveling, so you may want to update us there and then provide some initial thoughts about this topic before we start exploring it.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's good to be on the podcast again. I'm currently exploring the Southwest right now. I'm in Arizona, working my way over to California to do the Pacific Coast Highway in my RV. So, been a great trip so far, and but nice to be in a Starbucks right now and to be able to answer a few questions on a very, very important topic. And I think an initial disclaimer before we get into this is there may be times where it feels like I'm demonizing sport or whatever, and maybe that won't necessarily come across. I want to try to take a fair and balanced approach, but I really want it to come across that this is a fair and balanced approach, and these are not simple answers to some of these questions. There's a lot of gray area. There's a lot of yes and. There's a lot of both. And so I just want to say that kind of going into this, because anytime we're dealing with an individual's interest and passions, it can be difficult to piece and partial out, is this something that I want to keep doing? Is it something I need a break from? Or is it something I really, really actually enjoy doing all the time and I'm fine with it? And where we're at along that continuum at any given time can kind of shift and change. So I just want to put it out there. If I offer an alternative approach or thought process at some point, that it's not demonizing sport, it's just looking at it from another angle.
Interesting viewpoint to start it off, Steve, which you mentioned, not wanting to demonize it and people's passions are their passions. So we're going to take a look at the coach's perspective here. So we're going to get in a little bit, maybe with a high school coach, and then maybe aimed at some youth coaches a little bit. So depending on the sport, and by the time an athlete does reach high school, that athlete may have been playing that sport year round for several years. How does a high school coach help prevent that athlete from getting burnout?
Yeah, well, I think there's, in some ways, the coaches have some influence over this, of course. I mean, I think it's being mindful, first off, and aware that athletes and students and people have multiple things going on. So I think sometimes coaches can get really excited, especially if they see the new tall kid or somebody that had their growth spurt. So they start recruiting that boy or girl into their sport if they don't already play it, or they're getting really excited about this person kind of joining their team at some point. So they really encourage, hey, have you been hitting the gym? Have you been exercising? Have you been joining some clubs? So I think just keeping in mind this holistic reality that student athletes and young people have. There's more than just sport that's going on. So being mindful of that. The other thing, I just think, once the child is in your sport, to do your best to kind of keep it fun. Yes, there's a time and place to working hard and giving great effort and competing and maximizing one's performance and productivity, but also that needs to be on a foundation of care, fun, support, because that's going to round out and provide additional kind of energy for that athlete to want to keep going. If it's just ground and pound all the time, that's going to enhance burnout. But if you show some love and care and fun along the way, that's going to help rejuvenate the athlete.
Yeah, and so some of our athletes do play multiple sports. So do you feel a multiple sport athlete either increases or decreases the likelihood of getting that burnout in a particular sport? And then also, how do those two coaches kind of monitor the athlete playing both sports?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about a fuel tank, me doing this drive across the country, um, I may be seeing really incredible things along the way, but the more I drive, regardless of how exciting and thrilling it is, my fuel tank is going to decrease. And so more is more regardless, you know? So I think, yeah, the more sports you play, it may increase the likelihood of burnout and the fact that you are decreasing your gas tank. Though having said that, the variety might actually help from you getting burnout in a specific sport. So multiple sports may drain you like generally, but having the diversity may help you to avoid getting burnout in those specific sports. But having said that, if you love sport, then you may not get burnout. And if that's what you just really enjoy doing, it's like if you were a musician and all you wanted to do every day was play music, I don't think any of us is going to be like, well, wait, watch out, you might get burnt out. If that's what they really love and that's where their ethos and passion is, then I don't think they really need to worry about it too much. I do think coaches have an opportunity to be in cahoots with one another in terms of what their student athletes are up to. Not every single kid on your sport is going to be involved in another sport either. So it's not like it's a super time intensive things. And chances are, if you have a child or an athlete on your team, there may be other athletes that are also participating in that other same sport. So if that's the case, you can kind of do a 2-for-1 type of special where you're talking with another coach about a collection of athletes versus feeling like you're having to have all these side conversations. And it doesn't require much. It can be a 5-minute conversation, just an agreement of how we're going to handle this dual athlete and taking it from an egalitarian perspective. I'll also say that depending on the coach themselves, it's just being open to that conversation too. I think is really important. Sometimes we can have some turf wars, and that's really unnecessary when it just comes to a child that's wanting to develop and participate in sport.
Yeah, I think we've talked about in earlier podcasts, some sports just naturally go together, like track and cross country, maybe football and wrestling and your field events and track. And sometimes the same coach is dealing with both athletes, or the same athlete, I should say. So some of that could also be just better relationship building between the athlete and the coach. So
Absolutely, absolutely. And for some athletic institutions, for some high schools, the coaches are not in the school, so they're external. So there can be some logistical concerns as well, and to just try to work that out and be open to working that out.
Yeah, I know we'll get into this a little bit more in a parent segment, but for a youth coach as well as a high school coach, what are some signs they can be looking for that an athlete could be getting burned out or just maybe needs a break?
Yeah, well, fatigue is the biggest one first. It's almost like physically the body starts to know before the mind does. Sometimes our bodies are ahead of the mind. So I think the tired going to practice, you feel a little bit more sluggish. It just is a little harder to get out of bed in the morning to hit that swim practice or to hit that gym. And there's less vigor overall in kind of your physical being. And then what can follow suit from there is kind of the low psychological motivation. I don't really feel like doing this. This is I'm less enthusiastic about this than I used to be. And then it starts to generalize. So now you don't even want to really go to school. It's starting to actually look a bit more like depressive symptomology as well. So it can be a slippery slope, but it really starts with that fatigue level that's been more pertinent than it has been in the past.
Okay. So we'll address this question more at the middle school, high school coach. So the season has ended. The athlete is in a singular sport. What is some advice a coach can provide to maybe give a little bit of rest after the season ends? I know as you get into high school, the OHSAA kind of dictates you should have a week or two off in between sports if you're a multiple sport athlete. I mean, even if you just, let's say, play football, what would be the proper rest you should take before maybe starting weight conditioning for the next season or whatever?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if there's any specific guidelines kind of on my end. I think it's a little bit of a know thyself type of thing, but it's the biggest step. The first step is just to be intentional about this. I think the challenge or issue for a lot of people is they're just not intentional. One sport ends and one season ends and they just go right into the next one without even really thinking about it. And I just think there's an opportunity for us to be intentional about, do I need a day or a week or a half a week or 2 weeks between these seasons? What do I feel I need? And so to actually take a step back, pause for a moment, take inventory of mind, body, and spirit, have a conversation with parents or the caregivers or the support network, and make a determination. Okay, now that this season has ended, what do I need for myself to finish off that season and get ready for this next season? And that may vary from individual to individual, but be intentional about it.
Okay. Do you maybe feel coaches are part of a problem instead of a solution with the burnout? And by that, I mean, there are so many off-season programs kids can do. Like, for instance, in basketball, play AAU. For baseball, get involved in a summer travel league. There's weight conditioning, performance coaches, other things going on. So do you think coaches are part of this problem, or can they be part of the solution?
Everybody is part of the problem and everybody is part of the solution, right? It's just depending on which voice we're allowing to have in and what that voice is kind of saying to us. So coaches can be the problem if it's like, go hard, there is no such thing as a break. I want you here the moment, not only the moment after the season ends, but actually the moments before that season actually ends. So yeah, that's going to cause problem. If the weight and conditioning coach is like, hey, you need to get in here as soon as possible, now it's time to bulk up for football, that's a problem. If you have a parent that's like, no, come on, like, this is your sport, this next one is really your sport, let's get after it. If you have a teammate that's like, oh, thank God, baseball is over now you can join us in basketball. So everybody could potentially have a voice that's a little slanted towards pressure, but equally a coach can say, hey, I know you just finished up a season, take your time, we're here, we're ready to rock. A teammate could be like, hey, so happy to have you back, looking forward to getting here whenever you get here. A parent could be like, hey, let's take a break, all right, be intentional, take inventory of yourself. Weight conditioning coach says, hey, we have all the time in the world, okay? Your body needs to adapt and adjust and recover, and then we'll get you back to feeling strong and ready for the next sport. So each of those voices could have a negative slant, and each of those voices could have a positive slant, depending on how they choose to approach it.
Nice. And so, final question here. Coaches often, especially at the high school level, feel a little pressure to have a winning program. Do you feel like that pressure is kind of pushing our athletes? Are they maybe pushing too hard for their own goals? And does that also cause burnout at any time for the athlete?
It certainly can. Again, I'm not somebody that says we need to have just some like laid back sport culture. I mean, obviously sport's about competition and it's about pushing ourselves, and that's one of the big values of sport. But I think it can go too far sometimes when that intensity and that influence and effort and that desire to win is not on that container of love, care, and support. You got to deliver both. It's I can drive long distances in my van, but I have to stop and fill in the gas tank, and I have to change the oil, right? And I have to slow
Right.
down when it's times to slow down and stop at stop signs when I need to stop at stop signs. The same thing applies to sport. You can only push so hard until the athlete engine blows up. And so you can push, but you got to take care of them along the way.
Anything else you want to add for our youth coaches, maybe our middle school coaches or our high school coaches about youth burnout or athletic burnout?
Yeah, I think just reiterating and acknowledging this is a much more holistic and comprehensive individual athlete than there ever used to be. In the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, you had like football, basketball, and baseball. And that was it. There wasn't social media, there wasn't music, there wasn't choir, there wasn't coding club, there wasn't computer club, there wasn't all these additional things. It wasn't speech and debate that all these kids could get involved in and find passion in. But now there's such a plethora of things that students and kids can find themselves being involved in and enjoying. And I think as a coach, it's important to respect that, and that not only does that mean a diversity of sport, but it means a diversity of interest and passions, period. And we should really celebrate a kid's desire to do a variety of things while also keeping an eye out to make sure that they're not overdoing it.
Well, as always, thank you for joining us on this episode, Dr. Steve. If you have a topic you'd like to hear discussed, always please let us know. Otherwise, until the next time, we appreciate you listening to the Health, Hope, and Happiness podcast brought to you by Stifel.
All right. Thanks.